So how do we change gene expression? When people have highly charged emotional experiences and it begins to change their emotional state and it changes their brain structure, it changes the mapping of their brain, how is it possible then that they can begin to select and instruct new genes and to change their health? Well, when you have an internal experience in your mind that carries an amplitude of energy that's greater than the hardwired programs in your brain and the emotional conditioning in your body, you will become biologically changed. Here's a person going along, living their normal life, and all of a sudden they have a highly charged emotional experience. That experience then wires and enriches the circuits in their brain, and it begins to send the chemical emotional signal to their body. And it's that chemical emotional signature to the body that begins to change the person's state of being. Why? Because we could say their body and brain are now in the past, and that event has changed them biologically. So how are they going to change the biology of their circuitry, their neurochemistry, their hormone expression, and even their gene expression? What happens for most people is they begin to create beliefs about themselves and their lives from past experiences. They are the thoughts neurologically and the feelings chemically that they embrace within the biology of their past experiences, which ultimately becomes their state of being. Because how you think and how you feel creates your state of being. So then when a person has an inner experience in the present moment that carries an amplitude of energy, or the emotion inwardly is greater than the shock or the betrayal from the past, it makes sense then when the emotional quotient is greater than the past experience, it's going to begin to rewire the brain and send a new emotional signature beginning to condition the body in that present moment to a new mind. And we could say then, your biology literally changes, or better yet, the past no longer exists. Now I want to tell a story to be able to bring this all together. We had a 72-year-old woman come to a week-long event in Vancouver, British Columbia, and this woman was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And Parkinson's disease is a deficiency in dopamine in the brain. And when there's not enough dopamine in the brain, all of a sudden the upper motor neurons in the brain can't communicate very well with each other, and the effect it begins to produce involuntary tremors and this type of paralysis called spastic paralysis. You see a limitation in motor function, or when a person tries to move, they have these involuntary tremors. Try as they may to control it with their conscious mind, they can't. And in fact, a lot of times when they get anxious or nervous, their tremors or their condition amplifies. Now, that is a gene that has been downregulated. So then, this woman, in one meditation, had one inner experience that literally was so profound, it was so elevated, that when she came back to her senses, she literally began to express different proteins. In a sense, she changed her body by thought alone. And so we brought her onto the stage, and her condition before this event was that she couldn't swallow, she couldn't chew her food, she had saliva constantly running off of her mouth, she had to consistently use a tissue, and she couldn't stand up. After that one inner event that carried an amplitude of energy that was greater than the hardwired programs in her brain and the normal emotional feelings that she felt on a daily basis, we could say that in that moment, genes began to become upregulated and new information was coming into her body. She stood on the stage and she said, after all these years, all the therapies, all the different drugs, all the different surgeries that I had, nothing seemed to change this condition. And now I can speak better, I can chew my food, I can blow my nose, I can swallow, and for the audience, she sat down and then stood up, and she literally had a significant change in gene expression, and it happened in one instant. Now, by the same means, There are people that have had abusive childhoods with alcoholic parents, where they were abused every single day when their father came home from work. And it wasn't just one event. It was a series of several events over time that began to select and instruct genes that caused them to have a rare genetic condition. Now, in this case, this person, it took them almost 2 years to literally consistently knock on the genetic door and break out of the patterns of their normal thinking and the way they typically felt. In other words, every single day they understood that they were their own genetic engineer, and every single day they were working on going from the old self to the new self. And of course, life isn't that linear. They had their own stress events, they had their own difficulties, they had their own financial problems, they had family dynamics, and because they were living life, it took them more time. But every day, they were shaving down a little bit more of those emotions from the past and learning how to elevate their emotional state. And they were practicing every single day, combining a clear intention with an elevated emotion and moving into a new state of being. Now, this person's health condition was very limited. They had the very scaffolding and the structure of their bones were degenerating, where they had numerous fractures. And the doctors told them there was no solution for this genetic condition. But if you understand then, if the scaffolding of bones is made of proteins, and that you could actually begin to upregulate those genes, every single day she was knocking on that genetic door and shaving down that emotional state and changing her thoughts and feelings, that in 2 years she reached the point in her life where she was so in love with herself, so in love with life, so grateful to be alive, that she no longer cared if she even had the condition any longer. She went to the hospital. They did the urine samples to determine if the disease was still present, and she got the call the next day that the gene was literally upregulated and her condition was back to normal. Now, this person, to this day, still has the change in her health. Now, when she stood on the stage and told the story to the audience, there was a woman in the audience with the same rare genetic condition. And she looked at that person and said, "If she could do it, I can do it." And this woman reversed the same rare genetic juvenile onset condition within 3 months. In other words, the person who had the healing broke the 4-minute mile, and it made it easier for the next person to do the same. And that's exactly what starts to happen in this work. I believe that health and wellness can become as infectious as disease.